Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello there, I'm Lauren Carroll Harris. I'm a writer and digital curator. Thanks to Uncle Charles Madden, an elder from Gadigal country who offered that welcome to country. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm streaming from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and I acknowledge the elders of this land. And wherever you are on this continent of Australia, you are standing on unceded sovereign Indigenous country. Well, thanks very much for logging on and streaming with me to launch this digital e-catalogue for the launch of Kaldor Public Art Projects 2020 iteration of Do It Australia's e-catalogue. It's the latest iteration of the art format designed by curator Hans Ulrich Obrist, in which audiences get creative with DIY instructions from really interesting artists, thinkers, writers, creatives from all different backgrounds. So tonight we're peeking behind the digital curtains of this e-catalogue to see how Do It Australia was commissioned, curated and exhibited over social media during lockdown. So coming up, I'll be speaking with Monique Leslie Watkins, Kaldor Public Art Projects digital and editorial manager, who edited this digital catalogue. We'll be talking to Dale Harding, a Brisbane-based artist. Hi, Dale, who created instructions for audiences to uncover water stories in their local area. We'll also be speaking with Zhen Kueh. Hi, Zhen, audience member who's created what I think is a really beautiful response to Dale's instructions. And finally, we'll be talking to Emily Sullivan, curator at Kaldor Public Art Projects and curator of this project. So hi there, everyone. It's great to see you from far away and be here with you virtually. I know this is the first time some of you have even kind of had a virtual face-to-face despite making this amazing project together. All these panelists will be joining me later in the discussion. So I'll see you all later and looking forward to speaking. What's come out of this project is more than an e-catalogue. It's a digital living archive. And this launch allows Kaldor Public Projects to thank the thousands, literally thousands of Australian and international viewers who've followed and taken part in Do It Australia. So, before we dive into the catalogue, let's go back in time. I want to talk you through the background of Do It so you can see what's really unique about this new version of it. Since 1993, curator Hans Ulrich Obrist has invited artists around the world to create DIY artworks that anyone can make anywhere. And he called that format Do It. And over the years, artists like Yoko Ono, Gilbert and George, Marina Abramovich, and Tracy Emin have all been part of it. The idea of generating art from written instructions, I think is really interesting because it allows chance and it allows audience participation to mold the outcome of an artwork in real time, in a living context outside of a traditional gallery. And this approach of art by instruction has a rich history in the art world. Actually, Marcel Duchamp is the originator of it. So it's a project that feels contemporary because it fosters interactivity without leaving people isolated in front of screens, which has been, you know, one of the key feelings of this funny year. Hans Ulrich Obrist thought of this concept because the white cube of the gallery irks him. Closing dates bother him. I think he prefers to think of exhibitions as seeds that can grow. And now Do It is one of the most widely produced art shows in the whole world. It's always been beautifully open-ended and adaptive as an idea for how to make art together across boundaries and across borders. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, that idea became much more urgent, I think, for Kaldor Public Art Projects. So let's dive into the catalogue together. I'm going to share my screen with you and we're going to go there together. Now, this time around, like I said, the pandemic presented, pardon me, just a moment. It presented Kaldor Public Art Projects with a new concept for this, which is their 36th project, to adapt the Do It format to a world where artists and audiences were separated by social distancing, and where simple instructions would now be issued primarily over Instagram for followers to interpret in their own way. And that enabled, the art world to stay alive while public spaces were closed, and repositioned the internet as a public space where art could happen again. This e-catalogue shows that Do It Australia generated an extraordinary breadth of artists' responses. Within a matter of weeks, back at the beginning of the pandemic, these kind of emails were circulating, and 18 creative figures from the fields of art, literature, architecture, dance, music, philosophy, even floristry took part, and more than 300 audience responses were generated, and all of those responses are collected in this website. Let me show you. If we scroll to the bottom, we'll see the full contents. And you can navigate the curated collections above, but down here you can see that there are brand new commission essays by John Kaldor, by Hans Ulrich Obrist, and by Kaldor Public Projects curator Emily Sullivan. And then on the right, you'll see the full archive of audience responses, and they're searchable by each artist. This time around, there was such an interesting list of instructions that were issued by artists. There were affirming, kind of quite funny, empowering insights into the creative process provided by Tracy Moffat. Major author Gerald Murnane provided audiences with a way to open up images in their minds with a writing exercise that I really adore. There were gestures toward making small everyday moments quite grand and meaningful. Amrita Heppy here asked audiences to create a monument and to surrender. And I think it's fair to say that finding a path, finding a way through beauty was another common theme. For example, with the instructions provided by art duo Nova Milne to create another world at home. And there were many invitations to engage with nature. So like I said, before you reach the contents at the bottom, you will come through all these curated collections of how audiences followed the instructions or diverged from the instructions in some cases. Here's one of the curated collections of audience responses to performance artist Latai Tomapio's work. And alongside it, you'll see all kinds of written responses, audio files, videos, photographs, quite an amazing breadth of creative dialogue. So most of all, this iteration of Do It Australia was triggered by the context of lockdown. It meant life moving online. It meant art moving online. It was something that was right for our time, that was right for the pandemic. And you can see that this project was conceived from the beginning as an e-catalogue. You can see that it contains lots of email excerpts, audio and video, and all the possible digital ways of communicating how the project came into the world. You can't do that with a digital catalogue, a printed book. So this isn't just a translation from print to the internet. So with us to talk us through it is Monique Leslie Watkins. She is Kaldor Public Art Projects digital and editorial manager, and she edited this Do It Australia virtual catalogue. Hi there, Monique.
Hey, Lauren.
So Do It wasn't always conceptualised as a digital project or an e-catalogue, was it?
Yeah, so delivering Do It online was definitely born out of the necessity of the pandemic, as you said. But once we did roll out this project in a digital space, we came to thinking about a catalogue, and to do justice to the material that we received, both from artists and from audience responses, it felt like a natural fit, and probably the best way we could try and publish was to do so online. When we started researching, we didn't find many precedents for publishing online in an institutional setting. We wanted to do something that wasn't just putting a book on a website, but was actually integrated into that format. So working with designer Alexander Tanazefti, we kind of found a way to present all that material in quite an experimental and fluid way. And yeah, we were really struck by the advantages of not having a cost to the user who wants to go and read the catalogue, being able to share it internationally, sort of opened up the reach significantly as well.
Yeah, I mean, Kaldor Public Art Projects has done 36 projects. You must have boxes and boxes of past catalogues, past books. It must be nice not creating more stuff, more objects as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a sort of ecological advantage to that, or a sort of lightness to collating all these things online.
What Kaldor Public Art Projects is really known for is usually, mass scaled, bold interventions into public spaces beyond, the traditional museum space. And this is pretty different, isn't it? I mean, how did you approach rethinking a digital art project as a public art project?
Yeah, I've always had this feeling that maybe there's room to think about digital space as an extension of public space. And maybe that's as an organization that's not so much tied to a venue, perhaps it did make it a bit easier for us to kind of step into that when we were working on Do It Australia this year. For me, I've worked with the Kaldor Public Art Projects Instagram and online platforms for some years. So I feel like I've had this direct connection to our audience, maybe, which kind of opened up this way of thinking. And what we really tried to do with Do It Australia was to think about how we could use something like Instagram to actually present the artworks themselves, rather than presenting marketing or something tangential or peripheral to the artworks. And that felt really natural and native to the concept itself.
Yes, I love this idea of reshaping social media platforms to be something more than influencers, advertisers, more than publicity. I mean, what you're doing is asking people to do things in an art context on Instagram. How do you archive that? How do you go about documenting and collecting this digital art life?
Yeah, so I've been involved with a few audience participation projects before where we've sought submissions, but what those have often been is setting up a web form where you ask people to then attach something or enter a note. And I was really resistant to doing that for this project, because I felt like if we're presenting work on Instagram, people are going to naturally interact with it by posting on Instagram as well, whether it's on a story or just kind of, like interacting in quite an organic way. So that was something we did with this project. In terms of how to document it, there's really no clear-cut way at all. So I was basically keeping an eye on everything that came throughout. Hashtag Do It Australia. I was sort of screen recording Instagram stories on my phone, so using a third-party app to save posts as they came up. The medium is inherently quite ephemeral, so documenting it is challenging, but I feel like rose to the challenge for this. We ended up with over 300 responses. I think it was about 1,000 files and nearly 4 gigabytes of data at the end.
Yeah, you're really contending with the fleeting nature of social media. And we're not just here to talk about the artist's instructions. We're here to celebrate this wealth of audience involvement, what was created, the dialogue between artists and the public, this accumulation of pictures and moments generated at this strange juncture of time. I'm going to go to the catalogue, and why don't you talk us through one of the responses from the audience that really speaks to you?
Yeah, so I wanted to have a look at collection 5 in the catalogue. So we've got 2 responses there, which are responding to Latai Tumapeo's instruction. So the first is that video work by Brie Alexander and Supriya Baba. And it's like this quite beautiful movement and recitation piece that they did remotely over Zoom. They were in different countries, but they have this sort of friendship as well as a collaborative practice. So that's quite a beautiful video. And when you click into it, you'll also see there's a little excerpt from our correspondence we had. So wherever I could, I included these notes from the creators as well. I was really quite touched to be able to correspond with people, whether it was on Instagram DMs or via email, and people really did put so much thought and creativity into their responses. The second is that audio bar and quotation that you've got there. So this came in from Sue-Ann Plankovic and St. Aloysius College, and it's an audio file of a class of Year 12 boys also responding to Latai's instruction by reciting their genealogy. And it was the only purely audio file that I received, and it is such a touching piece and also such an innovative medium that they chose to present it in. So I really love the 2 of those as a pairing and sort of as an indicator of the broad variety of responses that we received.
Fascinating to see how these processes are changing under lockdown or during the pandemic. Thanks so much for your insights, Monique. Great to hear.
Thanks, Lauren.
Well, with us next is Dale Harding, a widely exhibited artist, descended from the Bidjara, Gungaloo and Garringbal peoples of central Queensland. He now lives in Brisbane. Dale provided a most beautiful and I think very profound instruction for people to unveil the natural pathways of water that, may have been paved over and veered off course by processes of urbanisation and development since colonialisation. I'm just going to read you the instructions that Dale provided. Sealed underneath the road, out the front of where I live, used to be a creek bed. And in the park behind the houses at the end of the road is where the water still likes to lie. Make visible the water story of the land where you live. Well, it's great to be joined by Dale today. He is joining us, I believe, from his studio in Brisbane. Let's see if Dale's here on the line. Hi, Dale. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Lauren.
Tell me more about your concept, this idea, which is so simple but quite deep, I think, to reveal hidden stories of the land. Tell us about this watercourse near you that inspired your instruction for the project.
Yeah, so the watercourse near me is all under housing development largely. So where I live is on Turrbal country, north of Brisbane, and I've been in that location for a little over 10 years. So in that time I've seen, on that country, I've seen the 2011 and 2013 floods come through, and the house is really at the bottom of what might be this sort of the clay pan of the small valley that is now developed all the way around. And on either end are 2 big parks, and the water does fall to the east that way, that I've seen in those big big rain events, big flooding events. So it's always been visible to me living there, particularly obviously during the wet season, but there's typically water falling and moving through the suburban lots. So the water story had been around me and been visible there. And when we were in lockdown, and particularly if I was looking outside the window and considering what might be worthwhile spending some time and interacting with from a closed proximity, that was one of the first things that came to mind. Yeah.
It's so interesting to hear you describe that place, because you haven't named specific places in your instructions. You've kept that deliberately broad, and I think that works so well because it encourages the audience to identify the water near them as a character with a real story and a presence. And, you know, we tend to think probably that stories belong to people, but environments have stories too, don't they?
Certainly, certainly. And I was wondering what might be a way to translate that sensibility of looking and listening and observing the water story around you if you were, say, in the United Emirates, in a dry climate, or in Scandinavia where there tends to be lots of water movement. So this was a way for me to do a couple of things, which was switch back to a way I typically write, so my artist statements, but also to leave it open as possible, so that those interacting with the Do It Australia project might find a local way without being immediately pinned to seeking my immediate context. Yeah.
And then what was that like for you, seeing the public interpret and respond to your work? Because you weren't just doing the work and then walking away, were you?
No. I don't have an active Instagram account, but I was checking in and seeing how the program was running on Instagram. And so it was a very strong negotiation actually between the poetics of what I was hoping to do and looking at the broader shared environmental and maybe universal stories of water that we might understand across different land and across different cultural practices. But also it was quite amazing to see the very specific stories indicated by place and by ancestral stories indicated on Instagram as well. So, the really shared international context of what I was trying to do was flowing and moving around, but also I was quite impressed by some of those very specific ones. Yeah.
That's so interesting. In your art practice, you talk a lot about lineages and passing things on from one generation to the next and bringing cultural continuums into the future. But usually you're working with materials, with colors, with specific sites and very concrete visual means. So, but there is a continuity, isn't there, of writing a text of instructions as a way to give something to the audience, a continuity.
I hope so, because even though I live away from where my family sees our ancestral homelands, I'm living in Brisbane, in suburban Brisbane. I try to still have those sensibilities and those ways of being while I'm here in Brisbane. And so, yeah, I was looking to open that out. And typically I might lock it down to a very specific location and a really specific source or a really specific material in my other practice that's been purposeful for certain reasons, but looking towards the wider reach, loosening that up and opening up to the shared stories of water, and maybe even prompting that stories might not be told or remembered even in other places.
Yeah, I guess it's also quite evident that, as you say, you live away from where you grew up. You're from a regional area, but you're in the urban landscape now. It sounds like that really changes your thinking about the stories of the land. I mean, I'd like to know, the cultural continuum that you belong to understands that we are the environment and the environment is us. How do you think we can shift the West's cultural narrative of wrongly seeing the ecology outside of ourselves, as being outside ourselves?
Yeah, the first one would be by observing, seeking and looking out, looking out and seeking. I really enjoy learning about the landscape here in Brisbane, particularly on the north, different layers of the landscape open out over time. The more I spend time around driving and becoming more familiar, I might see how the land is falling. And that's the continuum of what I've been, acculturated with from other places, from central Queensland. So I try to do that as a way of caring and being present, and also maybe drawing attention if I'm with others to how this might fall. So in terms of the continuum, it's really the sensibility. If I don't have the specific information, or if I'm not seeking to pin down really very specific local information, I'm interested in that sensibility, the way of being, and the way of being present and aware of particularly the water flows around Brisbane, but also the landfall. So I might anticipate where that is. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your participation in the project, for your generosity and your insights tonight, Dale. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you.
Well, our next guest is a member of the audience, a member of the general public who responded to Dale's instructions. Zhen Kueh is a member of the public who lives in suburban Sydney, and she brings a really interesting perspective to Dale's instructions because she's worked in interior design and architecture, and what she's created, I think, really stands as a substantial artwork in and of itself. I feel it's really special. Hi there, Zhen. Are you there with us tonight?
Hi, Lauren.
Hi. How are you going, Zhen?
Good, thanks. And yourself?
I'm great, thank you. Tell me, what was it about Dale's instructions that sparked something in you?
I would say that it is from learning about Dale's works, and that seeing his instruction make visible the water story of the land where you live would lead to an incredible opportunity to listen and to learn. As a spatial designer, I'm always curious about the environment in terms of how we see it and be with it in a more symbiotic way, and being aware of underlying sensitivities too. And to me, Dale's practice embodies phenomenal sensitivity and sensibility to the environment that also conveys cultural, social histories, where his works speak of his family's connection to country. If I can maybe share with you a personal experience from one of Dale's works, that's the Leap Watershed, that for me holds kind of like a profound moment of awakening, sort of in viewing of the artworks was during the height of the bushfires last year. And I remember the feeling just being in front of the canvas of layered earth and being absorbed into the minuscule soil particles, I suppose. You know, it was immense saturation, where my response, I remember, it was as if breath, you know, is being drawn out of you. And the feeling also reminded me of what I had witnessed in June 2019 when I was visiting my childhood home in Borneo, East Malaysia, where the rapid erosion of land on a mass scale had a similar effect. But as with Dale's painting, I guess, you know, as you move and it also changes with you. So there was this level of porosity as well. So then further learning about his artwork afterwards, then realizing in the creation of that particular piece that he's attempted to, you know, mouth-blown ochres onto the canvas, but because of the sheer size of it, it's, you know, left, you know, physically exertion of this action has exhausted him. But as the work stood, it reminded him of landforms, of very significant histories. And I feel that through his art, each landform carries a story. And to me, this is incredibly compelling, that history has transpired through, you know, the creation of art, but also to engage with history in this way and in the continuity of Indigenous art. And here in Australia, that is, you know, 65,000 years of knowledge. That is the oldest, but also living and continuing. So I remember it just being a profound moment. So when I saw the set of instructions, I feel I'm definitely will be learning a lot from this experience.
Yeah, I like this idea that art can convey the history of a place.
Mm.
Tell us about the specific place that fed into your response and what you saw.
Where I lived at that time with my sister Fen, who is a participant in the project in inner West Sydney, but first and foremost on Gadigal land, there was a hidden waterway very close to where we live in a deep gully. And for me, just having relocated to Sydney last year, the gully where the creek bed is somewhere that we visit to reconnect to nature and also to ourselves. You can hear birds in just complete stillness, and which is very unusual where we were, being a really dense residential area wedged between two major roads, and between the Sydney University of Sydney, located on a higher elevation, and Forest Lodge, where the terrain slopes through what used to be an old growth forest and towards Roselle Bay. So then, as I learned, as Sydney's landscape, going through rapid industrialization, the creek that was once a freshwater creek is now mostly encased in this, underground drains, like most natural waterways, unfortunately. And also parts of the gully has also become a dumping ground for industrial waste. Then what's also quite beautiful is that it's sort of left to its own natural process of rewilding, which is what Fen and I were drawn to. And the name Orphan School Creek came from an old orphan school near the Old Children's Hospital. And also just through the process of discovery, due to the sloping terrain, you quite literally descend into the forest and you reappear in this shrubs, there's trees, there's birds, and towards the bay. It's also somewhere I feel that you feel a sense of refuge as well. So yeah, it was quite a journey, I guess. Just literally following the water, traces of its presence, trying to understand the way it moves, what is it trying to say, feeling its place, its sound, and then learning of its history, of course, that echoes this sense of knowledge that is literally unfolding to you. And I guess there's different layers of understanding place. And for me, through this piece of writing, there's also in parts a visual recording of some sort, then gives voice to this lost connection between the natural and urban environment. And I guess this notion of the understory of place interests me, where we often, we're disconnected from the cultural historical understanding of it, sort of like an overlooking that it becomes normalized, and over time things are forgotten. So yeah, it's all been really incredible.
You thought so much about this. I mean, what is it about the participatory aspect of the format that got you thinking?
I guess I saw it as through this participation that it restores a sense of place, a sense of understanding. For example, what was significant for my learning, there's also, I guess, uncovering the discovery process, but then also it's as if like you're collecting all these things that you've been paying attention to, listening to, but actually then trying to understand this collection as to what you've collected. And I guess what was significant for my learning was, the creek flowing from the watershed below the university grounds. What was there before everything else? It was a gathering place where maybe fish even made their way upstream. Salt marshes, fringing the lower parts of the creek, yielded shell middens of cockles and oysters. And it was also a place for respite. And adjacent to the university is a significant ceremonial site, for example. And also just starting a book by Dennis Foley, for example, in his, it's called What the Colonists Never Knew. It's a history on Aboriginal Sydney, for example, and they actually do cover that site where the university hall currently is, once stood a funeral forest, and that much of that land is incredibly sacred. So I just feel like once you start this process, it just keeps revealing itself But that being said, to without I contemplate the question, who gets to participate in terms of art, in terms of architecture. I guess the answer in short is everyone, with a genuine understanding of one another, of course, and it requires openness and generosity. And without my sister Fen, for example, participating with me, the depth of what I felt from the experience would have been very different. As without Dale's open-ended instruction, and without, the co-curation of everyone, and even the artists just being very creative with their instructions. I'm just one of hundreds of responses, and that's, I think, the most profound part, that everyone's participating. It doesn't matter where you are, contributing to, a constellation of artworks that we can call ours.
Yeah, that's a beautiful sentiment. And I think your work, the photographs you put together, that map that you provided, really reminds me that, it's wrong-headed to think of water as only existing in, bodies of water, rivers, oceans. In fact, it's distributed everywhere. It's in us. And your photographs really show that, there's a trickle everywhere. There's little, plants bursting out from every brick. You've brought so much care and thought to this project. So thank you, Zhen, and please pass on our thanks to Fen, your sister, and other participants. And thanks for contributing tonight as well.
Thanks, Lauren.
No problems. Okay, well, finally with us, I'd like to introduce to you Emily Sullivan. She's a curator with Kaldor Public Art Projects, and she's also written a new essay for this e-catalogue. It's great to have Emily here with us tonight. Hi there, Emily.
Hey, Lauren. I'm loving the chats. It's been really nice listening. Thank you.
Me too. I can't get enough of any kind of human input, human interaction.
Nice to hear Zhen's discovery. That was beautiful.
Yeah, it really reinforces that art is not about watching, it's about participating, I think, for me. I mean, for you, this must have been such a different approach to curating and commissioning artworks. Tell me more about this process of working with artists and getting delivered instructions in what I believe was a matter of days.
Yeah, it was really fast turnaround. The process was really different to how we normally work. I think our kind of timeframes normally stretch anywhere from like 2 to 5 years. We obviously had different kind of time pressures with everything that was going on, and really big. The urgency from John was to really create activities and to put on a project, as we always do, but for that was appropriate for the public. In this way. So yeah, there were new pressures, and we were reaching out to people, inviting them to artists, creatives from beyond the visual arts to create instructions and have them back within days. I think 2 weeks was the longest stretch of time that we had. And yeah, we were familiar with some artists, but some artists were new to us. So it was a really strange kind of initial phase of kind of introducing what our ambitions were, telling them how we wanted to deliver the project, and then hoping that artists A, felt compelled to participate, B, could come up with an idea and felt happy to contribute, and then rolling it out with the help of Monique and the broader team. So it was really unlike any project we've put on before.
Right, you had this quick turnaround. You had 18 participants, not just visual artists, providing instructions from different creative practices. You couldn't do things like, I guess usually you visit artists in their studio and see how the work's coming along. How did artists respond to this unusual request?
It was really varied. I think we had a lot of strange kind of it was mostly like phone calls and emails and Skype sessions, like with Nova Milner in New York, and just trying to get close contact with everyone as quick as possible, because I think to turn something around, an artist needs to have a really good understanding of what we're trying to do. But I guess from the perspective of the artist, you know, I think there are a lot of different opportunities for artists at the time, and institutions are really leaning on artists. And I think we saw this as a nice opportunity to, yeah, put on a project which maybe didn't have the same kind of production complexities for artists. I think from the artist perspective, it was less about being experimental on their part in the digital space, but actually starting with, you know, a simple idea and then using language and tailoring language to, you know, that suits them to convey that idea to the public. So different challenges for artists. You know, it was interesting hearing Dale say that he likened it to kind of writing an artist statement, which is really interesting. But yeah, I mean, some artists have been working in this way for many years as well. So I guess for some it wasn't strange at all. Ian Mills has been working in this way. Lauren Brinkat through recipes and scores. Khalid Sabsabi has participated in a Do It project before. So for some it was, you know, an easy kind of introduction, and you know, people were excited, I think. And for others, there was a bit of convincing. As you mentioned, there were some non-artists. So we had philosophers, musicians, florists. And that was a bit more difficult because, you know, the Do It project wasn't familiar to them, but, you know, also they work in such different mediums. So yeah, it was really spending the time having conversations with people on the phone, and making sure they felt comfortable to contribute to such a conceptual project. But yeah, really happy with the response. I think overall it was all yeses from the 18 people we invited, which was great, and some obviously really wonderful responses from the public. So
you're used to curating, you know, projects offline, and you know, galleries and museums and most arts institutions historically have thought of themselves as physical spaces with real world exhibitions, with collections a lot of the time, not Kaldor Public Art Projects. But yeah, most galleries, museums would think, you know, we've got a space and a collection and that's what art is. The pandemic completely disrupted that. Looking back, how has your thinking around the digital sphere shifted this year?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Obviously, a lot of amazing digital projects have come out of this year, and I think it's changed how we've all, you know, thought about curating, about producing, the roles of institutions in working with artists, and how much, you know, onus you put on an artist to kind of to pivot their own practice as well. I mean, in many ways, as John says in his essay, you know, this project was disseminated digitally and shared digitally, but there was so much of it, so much of the doing that was done remote to screens. And you know, you hear it when Zhen's talking about that collaboration. There's also a lot of kind of face-to-face kind of engagement encouraged. You know, someone like Megan Cope actually encourages you to, you know, get help from friends and family. And so I think there was a lot of other activity that was associated with this digital project for us, which I think was a welcome change for a lot of people. So I think, you know, that was a big positive for us. But I think it's really changed how we kind of adapt. I think it's a big theme for this year, adaptation, and how institutions need to change how they think. I mean, we co-curated this project, Monique and I, Monique Leslie Watkins, who you spoke to earlier, and you know, Monique has a really intimate knowledge of our online network. She's, you know, been leading the digital content for many years for Kaldor Public Art Projects. So even that decision was us thinking, well, actually, this is necessary, and there's a lot to be gained and learned from collaborating in different ways. You know, our designer, who Monique mentioned, Alex, he contributed at such a high level as well for us to deliver the project. So I guess it's thinking about how you assemble teams as well, and to deliver these projects. But yeah, it was a really big change for us. But I think the nature of the project also kind of helped or made it slightly more successful, because, you know, it was this, you know, it was digital in one way, but it was also very, you know, out in the real world as well. So I think it ticked a lot of boxes for people.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show you can make digital projects that don't contribute to digital fatigue, and that can be generative and foster real connections with people using this space here, but lifting up away.
That was something we were thinking. Even you know, we tried to understand how people would use different platforms. You know, we know some people like to use just Instagram. We know some people only want to hear about things through email. So I guess it's targeting out audiences in different ways, making sure the messaging is consistent, but also I think, as Monique touched on, really leading with, I think in this instance with Do It Australia, leading with audience responses. So rather than kind of presenting this highly curated, beautiful Instagram feed, you're arriving at Kaldor Public Art Projects Instagram and seeing public videos, public photos, and that encouraged participation, but it also really, made that point that interpretation is key, and every interpretation is just as valid as the next. So it's nice to see those all brought together in the catalogue.
And just finally, I know that education is a big mandate of your organisation. How did you think about, I guess, reaching out to students and educational institutions through Do It Australia online?
Yeah, it was the perfect project really to share with schools and students, because it's all about, I guess, chance, as you were touching on earlier, risk, kind of open-endedness. And I think that's something that students really thrive off. And so we, our team led by Antonia Fredman and Leah Smith, developed an amazing program called Do It Homework, which has been shared through a number of schools throughout New South Wales, but they've also developed online resources which you can find online, and there will be an upcoming event as well for Do It Homework, which you'll be able to find through our newsletter or on our website. We're going to be putting news up soon. So I think in the next 2 weeks, we'll be holding another event, which I think will be really great for those interested in education and the arts, but really using this as a starting point for exploring conceptual art with students. So stay tuned, but yeah, you'll be able to find information on that soon,
I love
hopefully.
that. Yeah, well, I mean, your work this year has really reinforced for me that, art can be made accessible. New living, contemporary art by living artists can be made real outside gallery spaces, and it can thrive in social media contexts in a genuine way. So it's been great to hear thoughts. Thanks so much, Emily.
Thanks, Lauren.
Okay, well, I'm going to wrap up with you all tonight. The Do It Australia project, it's still on, it remains open, it remains ongoing, certainly not over. And I know the artists and the Kaldor Public Projects team is looking forward to seeing, even more responses than the 300 that have been collected in this e-catalogue so far. And if this event has inspired you to make your own response, then I think that's the best possible outcome. This e-catalogue also really warrants your exploration. We've only scratched, its surface tonight. So the URL is doit.kaldorartprojects.org.au/catalogue. Share it. Dive into it, really get in there, click around. It's extremely interactive. You can't just read it, you need your headphones on. It's a bursting trove of such a creative and inspiring art project that managed to connect thousands of audience members and artists during a period of uncertainty, domesticity. It's been great speaking with all the panelists tonight. I'll get you back just for a moment to say goodbye and just to acknowledge all your contributions. Thanks so much, Monique Leslie Watkins, editor and co-curator. Thank you, Dale Harding, for contributing your brilliant and such thoughtful instructions. Thank you, Zhen, and your sister for responding so generously as well. And thank you, Emily Sullivan, curator at Kaldor Public Art Projects, for your insights into the back end of commissioning and curating. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lauren.
And thank you at home for joining me. Stay connected. You can use the hashtag. What's the hashtag again? Maybe Emily or Monique?
Hashtag Do It Australia.
Hashtag Do It
I think there are a few.
There's a few, but use that one, hashtag Do It Australia. And thank you, Kaldor Public Art Projects, for having me. Thank you and good night.